Okay. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In the interest of courtesy to our global network of podcast and live stream watchers, we will start roughly on time. I'd like to welcome you to this special joint event between the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA, and the Peterson Institute for International Economics. My name is Adam Posen. I'm president of the Peterson Institute. And it's been our pleasure here to host for the last day and a half a distinguished group of economists and former policymakers, and mostly economists who were former policymakers, from both sides of the Pacific in our high-level group focusing on common challenges to the U.S. and Japan. We've had a very fruitful couple days of discussion, and while we're not here to inundate you with grand and banal proclamations, we hope to share with you and our audience broad the spirit of some of our discussions and some of the specific points we raised, both on the real and reform side of the economy and on some of the monetary macro fiscal issues. But first, I'd like to call upon retired Admiral Dennis Blair, who is now, I believe, chairman of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA, to say a few remarks about our intent and what we've done. Dennis, thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Adam, for hosting this fine event, and thanks to all of you for joining us to launch the public part of this high-level working group on Japan-U.S. economic challenges. And we're delighted to co-sponsor this project with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation in Japan and with the Peterson Institute, and to work again with Adam Posen. He's done just a terrific job as the president of PIIE, such an important organization, and of course he's has a distinguished reputation as one of America's leading experts on Japan's economy. So wonderful leadership, and thank you, Adam. And we're also delighted that our co-chair from the Japan side, Professor Motoshige Ito, not only a preeminent economist, a longtime advisor to many prime ministers, and notably Prime Minister Abe, who is now trying to take so many dramatic measures in the economic life of Japan. At Sasakawa, we decided to launch this new initiative because it's been really more than 15 years since the last important Track 2 bilateral economic dialogue, and it's really time to discuss the common economic challenges and common economic aspirations of the United States and Japan. And I'd like to set these economic discussions in a slightly larger security context, because we are at an important, I'd really go further and say a critical juncture in the development of East Asia, which is the economic and power and growing power center of the world. For 60 years, it's been a combination of American military power, its huge and ever-growing consumer market, Japan's economic development, its overseas development assistance. These have really been the pillars under which East Asia has developed so dramatically, both economically and politically. And now these pillars are in question. China has been challenging American political influence, American military domination in the region. The U.S. market notably turned down a few years ago and is only barely recovering. Japan has been in a period of economic stagnation for 20 years. So the big pieces, the tectonic plates are moving in the security architecture of East Asia, and the United States and Japan, the largest and third largest economies in the world, very powerful military forces, similar democratic values, need to work together in order to move into the next phase. Because security and economics are, and always have been, intertwined. And while the United States and Japan neither can nor desire to go back to that old formula that worked for the past 50 years, they have to restore sustainable economic growth in both countries and cooperatively in order to maintain and rebuild a strong political and military policy that will support our shared vision for that part of the world, which includes a peaceful, prosperous, democratic, free-trading Asia benefiting all of the citizens of the region. So it's an important time, and it's important that Japan and the United States talk together at the informal as well as the formal levels and figure out the way forward. If Japan and the United States are working together, I firmly believe we can make Asia's future even better than its past. If we don't, we risk all of that. And the issue at the center of concern now working together is the TransPacific Partnership. We'll hear some more about it in one of our panels, but the group spent quite a bit of time discussing the economic and the political factors that are involved. But of course, there's more than just narrow economic and political factors at play in the TPP. The larger significance of it is to establish, together with the other countries that are working in the TPP negotiations, a set of economic relations that really will support that prosperity, freer trade, higher standards on the economic issues of the future, important issues, intellectual property rights protection, labor standards, the role of state-owned enterprises. It's really getting this framework right that will be the key to a brighter future. And if the US-Japanese negotiations broke down on an issue like, say, pork, when these huge, wider issues are at stake, which will really determine the future of the region and potentially of the world, I don't think that history would forgive us. There's a matter of timing. Each country has its own politics. Each country has its own domestic interests, which it must work through. But I think we have to keep our eyes on the prize here and ensure that we are moving forward and reach that goal. It's so important to both our countries and to the region. So with that, let me turn the podium over to Motoshige Ito, who will have a few words to say, and then I think we have our panel starting.
Good. Thank you very much for giving me a few minutes to talk about this new project. About 25 years ago, I was invited to the meeting here in Institute to have a kind of a forum between the American economists and Japanese economists to talk various issues between the two countries. At that time, the most heated discussion was trade conflict on automobiles and integrated circuit. So time changed, but still, I think there are many things we have to discuss between the two countries, and maybe many new issues are coming. So I think it's I'm very glad just we can restart this kind of the dialogue, and I hope we can just provide a better the output from our discussion. And so thank you very much for coming to the public seminar today. Thank you very much.
I'm Dan Bob with Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA, and we want to kick off our this morning's event with a first panel, which is going to be focused on trade and competitiveness. And as the other speakers have mentioned, we had a really good set of discussions yesterday and today about a range of issues. But a lot of time was spent on trade and competitiveness, particularly on TPP. We're going to begin today's panel asking Professor Ito Motoshige to come back and give a few thoughts. For those of you who are not familiar with Professor Ito, he's a professor at the Graduate School of Economics at the University of Tokyo, where he formerly served as dean. Importantly, he's on the Council on Economic and Fiscal Policy, which gives direct advice to the Prime Minister and the Cabinet on major economic issues, and including on the third arrow and the reforms that will be taking place in Japan. Our second speaker will be Bob Lawrence from Harvard. He's the professor of Trade and Investment at the Kennedy School of Government, and previously served on the Council on Economic Advisors, and is a non-resident fellow here at Peterson Institute. And then we have with us also Hideichi Okada, who is the currently senior advisor to NTT Data Institute of Management and Consulting, but previously served as vice minister at METI for international affairs from 2010 to 2012, and before that was director general of trade policy at METI. And batting cleanup for us will be Jeff Schott, who's here, the trade guru here at PIIE. Been here since 1973, but among many other things has taught at Princeton and Georgetown, and wrote a book in 2012 on understanding TPP. So my understanding is each of the panelists will come here to speak because we've got a presentation up there, but then when all the panelists are finished, we'll take Q&A from up there. So if I can turn it back to Professor Ito.
Thank you very much. We just discussed so many issues, and so I just try to highlight some of the aspects I am just familiar with. Because we have an expert on TPP and competitiveness in this session, so I rather just focus on the Abenomics, which may be a very good starting point. And as you know, after Prime Minister Abe took the office, and he just introduced various drastic measures and actually surprised the market. And now everybody are talking about what is the next stage of the Abenomics. And obviously the so-called third alloy is very important. Now, before just talking about just the second stage of Abenomics, I have to say the performance of the Japanese economy after Mr. Abe took the office was more than expected in the beginning. Just let me just name a few, point out a few economic indicators, like inflation rate. As you probably know, we are suffering from deflation a few years ago. It's now constantly increasing and trying to reach a level of the 2%, I hope. And the employment rate, unemployment rate was about 5.5% after Lehman crisis. Is now 3.6%. Which is almost close to what we call the full employment. And the growth rate for the fiscal year of 2013 was more than expected. The real term is something like 2.5%, which is very high. And corporate profitability, you probably know, is very good. So everybody now in Japan is expecting an increasing wage and bonus, and which will be also very important to stimulate the economy. And the many other areas. So far, so good. But question is, what is coming the next? And I think it is very important to think very carefully what's the sequence of the process of the policy influence on the economy. This sequence is very important. And there are two missing, I think, words usually when people are talking about the Abenomics. One missing word is time lag. And the other missing word is the demand-supply distinctions. Now, let me first talk about time lag. Because Mr. Kuroda, the governor of Bank of Japan, was so successful to just surprise the market. So everybody was now talking about what is coming next from Bank of Japan. And of course, that is very important. But you have to just go back to the university to remember what you are taught in the university. There is a time lag between the timing of the introduction of the policy and the timing of the effect on the economy. Especially in the case of Japan, just stopping deflation is a very important element to just discuss of the process of the influence of real economy. We often talk about the concept of the real interest rate. During the period of deflation, just remember what happened is inflation rate is minus 1%. A nominal growth rate is something like minus 1.5%. And interest rate was very low, but real interest is very high. And so no investment, no expenditures. Under deflation, the best thing is just to invest on cash. Now, what happened now is consumer price index is just moving towards 2%. Nominal growth rate is moving towards 3%, and nominal interest rate is still very low. So obviously, it has a very strong influence on the investment behavior and household consumption behaviors. And interesting is just market specialists just responded this kind of change of atmosphere very quickly after Mr. Kroda started the monetary policy. So you probably know, for example, expected inflation rate revealed in the market indicators such as the price index bond just moved very quickly. But when it comes to just behavior, ordinary business people, manufacturers, exporters, or ordinary peoples, it takes some time for them to just realize now Japan is a very different process of inflation. Wages increasing, which just push the price and so forth. So we probably will have a very visible influence on the real economic activity from now on. And you probably recognize, for example, just the investment by corporate sector just jumped up very rapidly in these days. Now, second very important thing is just the distinction between demand and supply side. Everybody is talking about supply side because the growth strategy is supply side. But the important thing is it takes some time for supply side policy to have an influence on real economy. We need a labor market reform, of course. And labor market reform is very important. But you can just imagine labor market reform will have an effect on the practice of the employment or the effect on the performance economy maybe in 2 years or in 3 years. We need a reform on agriculture sector. It is very important. And the reform in agriculture sector is very effective to just enhance our competitiveness. But again, just that kind of policy will have some time to just be realized in actual competitiveness. So there is some kind of missing link between the very immediate effect of the monetary policy and the very long-term effect of supply side policy. So what happened is the demand side. If you just read very carefully the newspaper, okay, the third arrow of the Abenomics is not growth strategies. Okay, the third arrow of the Abenomics is growth strategies that promote private investment. Okay, and the difference when you say just growth strategies, it just implies supply side policy, reform, opening the market. But when you say the growth strategies that promote private investment, just have a lot of implications on the demand side. Now you probably know Japan just suffered a lot from the 20 years of the economic stagnation and very weak demand. That was not very good for us. But there's at least one good thing. That is, we actually corrected the balance sheet problems. So household sectors, corporate sectors, banking sector just corrected the very difficult problem of the over debt or just over borrowing. And now they have a huge amount of cash. The problem is they are not just using these cashes. I had once a very interesting discussion with a very famous business person in Japan, Mr. Son. He's a president of SoftBank. Japanese people know very well because he decided to buy Sprint Nextel of the United States and was one of the biggest the purchase by Japanese company from American company. And surprising for us is he borrowed about 75% of the money for investment from banking sectors. So it's very in a kind of a risky investment. And I was just appearing in the TV program, and he came to my program, and I asked him, "Are you okay for this kind of the very risky project?" And his answer was very interesting. He said, "I am a boy." I don't know whether this is the English implication or not. That means, the problem for Japan is not a lack of money, lack of financial resources. Problem for Japan is a lack of the business people who take risk to make investment. So in that respect, we have a lot of opportunity if we can just agitate the business community to just move forward. And that is maybe the very important part of just stopping the deflationary mind. So I think the growth strategies for the government has very interesting combination of a very important supply side reform, which will provide a sustainable growth in the future, but at the same time to change the mindset or business community to just make them to just invest more. So this is just so very important timing. And the government, I think, is now increasingly recognize the importance of this combination, demand side, supply side. Now, you probably know just what kind of a supply side policy or growth strategy policy is now discussed in Japan. And to name a few, I have several very important examples: corporate tax reform, reduction of the corporate tax rate, or just TPP, which will be discussed by other presentators after me. Is also very important timing now. Not only just the trade negotiations is important, but also it will be very important timing for us to change our mindset for agriculture policies and other policies. And also the government is now working very hard to just attract more foreign direct investment to Japan, and which will also provide a lot of opportunity for our economy, and also increasing participation of female workers, which has a very strong support by Japanese people, because we have to do a lot of things to just have more participation of workers and so on and so forth. But the important thing is there is no magic to supply side. So what is important, you have to do as much as you can do, and so that you can have a correction of just the result of each supply side policy, and more important thing is change the mindset of the Japanese business community, Japanese people, and also overseas investment in Japan. So I want you to just have more focus on what the demand side of the Japanese economy is changing from now on. So I stop here, and I ask other people to talk about more about the contents of supply side policy. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ito-sensei. That was terrific. And now we're going to turn to Bob Lawrence, who's going to give a more direct talk about TPP and 3 scenarios.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, TPP is still a work in progress. It's under negotiation. And as I listen to the debates about it, I hear 3 contrasting views. And I believe there's an element of truth in each of these views. Ultimately, the negotiations and their implementation will tell us what mix of these 3 views actually turns out to be correct. The first is the view which is given to us actually most prominently by the policymakers themselves, who are implementing the program. They're offering this Trans-Pacific Partnership as a solution both to the needs of Japan internally when it comes to structural change. Indeed, it has been pointed to as a key component of the 3rd arrow of structural change within Japan, as well as a response to the needs of both Japan and the United States for a global economy that is better suited to the needs of the emerging supply chains and multinational firms that operate in that economy. The multilateral trading system essentially has been at an impasse. It has failed to produce the kinds of agreements which relate to deeper international agreement, to deeper international integration that the multinational corporations have called for, and has been unable to do so basically because there's a split among its members, and unanimity is required for an agreement. One group of members, you can call them the willing, are really eager to see agreements on foreign investment, to integrate with respect to common standards or reconciling differences in national standards. And I think it's because what they seek is a governance structure which allows firms to be truly global. On the other hand, there are a group of countries, some major emerging economies, who believe that it's in their interest to have more interventionist domestic policies and indeed to protect their domestic economies. And so it's been impossible to get an agreement at Doha. Nonetheless, those who are more interested in deeper integration have moved regionally. And the TPP and indeed the TTIP are manifestations of this drive to negotiate agreements that can deal not only with tariffs, but with the behind-the-border barriers, which are essential to the operation of these arrangements. I would also point to a second major trend which relates to the desire of those concerned about environment, to those concerned about labor standards, to have these issues included in a trade agreement. And the TPP also is likely to respond to their demands. So from one vantage point, this is an agreement which has deep consequences for the global trading system, which is likely to also have geopolitical consequences. It raises the issue of if these countries can join, if Korea and others join too, what kind of pressures will be placed on China. So from all of these vantage points, this is an agreement with great potential, provided it can be negotiated in sufficient depth. It could really transform the global trading system. So that's the positive spin. That's the positive scenario. But there's a second view, again with some elements of truth, which says that actually there are considerable political problems facing the negotiation of this agreement, and people who raise questions about whether the agreement is going to go far enough. Particularly when it comes to Japan, major issues relate to the question of agriculture. The structural needs of the Japanese economy, I think everyone agrees, require a major opening and restructuring of the agricultural sector. But the normal political responses have been to resist that opening, and the talks have been embroiled in discussions over the details of tariff structures and so on, which are quite understandable, but nonetheless not really compatible with a view that what is needed is deeper structural change. On the American side, there are large numbers of, a fair number of people who oppose these agreements in principle. And there's a serious issue about whether, even if an agreement is negotiated, it's actually going to get passed by the US Congress. Trade Promotion Authority, which the President proposed in his State of the Union address, was immediately rejected as an issue for this year's legislative agenda. And so it's quite natural that there's a skeptical view about these agreements. And then there's a third question, and I would characterize this as the stumbling blocks view of these agreements, as opposed to the positive spin which is being given about building blocks. This is an agreement that, after all, will reflect the political driving forces in the group of countries who are in the room. And the question is whether they negotiate an agreement that can, in fact, be used as a model or as a building block for others to join. If we do include issues like labor standards and environment in the agreement, if we do have particular deals which we cut within the context of that negotiation, will it then be possible for the large emerging economies like India or like China in particular simply to sign up and join on the same terms? Or, in fact, will we see the evolution of a world economy in which there are the standards makers and the standards takers, those who are able to agree with each other, and others who've been excluded, with major negative consequences, not only for their own interaction, but also for the multilateral trading system. So I just wanted to present those three pictures. As I say, I think we need to be mindful of all three. What we need to have is an agreement that's negotiated that can genuinely deliver on the potential for structural transformation, on the marketing opening potential, and on the provision of governance that are required for global integration. At the same time, I think we need also to be mindful of the need to construct an agreement that can genuinely serve as an integrative and building block arrangement rather than one that actually fragments the global economy. So with those three reflections, I look forward to my colleagues' interactions to hear which of those they feel is most likely. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. That was great. And now we're turning to Hideichi Okada, who will talk a bit about regional integration and supply chains.
Can you please put my slide on the screen? Here? Okay. Well, thank you for your kind introduction, Bob, Dan, and good morning, everyone. I'm Hideichi Okada. It's my great pleasure to be here as a panelist at the first annual U.S.-Japan Economic Dialogue, jointly hosted by Sasakawa Peace Foundation and the Peterson Institute of International Economy. First of all, I would like to express my deep appreciation to the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for its effort to try to revitalizing various policy dialogues between Japan and the United States in a wide variety of areas. I'm also thankful to its dedication to keep encouraging a policy dialogue between the two countries made by Peterson Institute of International Economy. Let me start with this slide. This shows the trade flows among Japan, China, ASEAN countries, United States, Canada, Mexico, and European countries. The size of arrows represents the volume of trade, and the color of arrows indicates the weight of intermediate goods, such as parts and components, in those trade flows. Dark blue represents 70% or more, the purple 60%, blue 50%, green 40%, orange 30%, and yellow less than 30%. So this chart tells you that Japan exports mainly parts and components to China and ASEAN countries. And then these countries export finished goods to United States and Europe. So as you see, in Asia, horizontal division of labor beyond the border has been highly developed. And it seems to me that the US is becoming an important part of this supply chain. And these internationally intertwined supply chain in Asia Pacific has been and will be supported by the efforts to develop regional economic integrations as shown in this slide. Let me start with lower left-hand side corner of this slide. ASEAN 10 countries have been playing a very active role to establish ASEAN +1 FTAs with China, Japan, Korea, India, and Australia and New Zealand. And it is quite natural to think about setting up a 10+6 FTA instead of 5 ASEAN +1s. So China proposed 10+3 arrangement in 2003, and Japan proposed 10+6 arrangement in 2006. And then it finally ended up with the idea of regional comprehensive economic partnership, or RCEP. And in 2012, 16 head of states announced their decision to start negotiation. The launch of the negotiation of China, Japan, and Korea on the left-hand side, upper left-hand side corner, FTA, was announced in November 2012, November 2. Xi Jinping has been refusing to meet with Prime Minister Abe since Abe took his office. And recently, there are no bilateral meetings between government officials from Japan and China. But the negotiation on CJK trilateral FTA is an exception. Officials from these three countries had 4 rounds of negotiations as of now. The upper right-hand side of this slide indicates TPP. Japan finally joined the negotiation in July last year. Japan and the United States are major trading countries and share the goal to further enhance economic growth, expand regional trade and investment through strengthening the rule-based trading system. It is important for Japan to have a high standard regional FTA arrangement with Asia-Pacific countries, including the United States, when business has been developing highly integrated supply chains over the Pacific as the previous slide. Some of my friends in China told me that it looked to them that TPP was a part of the US strategy to exclude China out of the free trade structure in Asia Pacific. But I do not agree with that idea. As you know, in 2011, at the APEC summit in Yokohama, all the leaders of APEC economies, including Chinese leader, agreed that their future final goal is to build a free trade area in Asia Pacific, or FTAP, which was originally proposed here in this building, and that both the RCEP and TPP were 2 possible pathways for their ultimate goal of FTAP. I'm very pleased to learn that recently China shows its strong interest in TPP. Now let us take a look at the comparison of the tariff rates of certain products among major countries. It is well known that the tariff rate on rice in Japan is extremely high, but however, when you look at the other tariff rates on the vegetables and fruits, such as spinach, carrot, and lemons, Japanese tariff on those agricultural goods is not so high compared to the other countries. And as you know, Japanese tariff on industrial goods is almost 0. And there is the famous chicken wall remaining 25% tariff on pickup truck. Then, what happens between US and Japan on negotiation on TPP? It is the photo when President Obama and Abe enjoyed the sushi restaurant in Tokyo when President Obama visited Japan April. So during the course of the sushi, they also talked about the TPP, and both leaders committed to taking bold steps necessary to complete a high standard, ambitious, comprehensive TPP agreement. They announced that, quote, they had identified a path forward on important bilateral TPP issues. And also, they said, quote, that it marked a key milestone in the TPP negotiations and would inject fresh momentum into the broad talk. The size of the GDP of Japan and the United States accounts for 80% of total GDP of the TPP 12 countries. Every countries in the negotiation are watching very carefully what's going on between Japan and the United States. I strongly believe that speed of the negotiation and the content of the agreement between Japan and the United States are very important because they create a momentum of the whole negotiation, and also they set the standards of the ambitiousness of the whole agreement. Between Japan and the United States, the two countries share most of the points on rule issues. The major areas for negotiation right now are market access on auto and certain agricultural products. I think it's hard negotiation, but I'm very respectful to negotiators from both countries for their hard work to try to forge out a win-win solution to this very important 21st century agreement. And 2 weeks ago, when trade ministers from 12 countries gathered in Singapore, it seems to me that the development of the recent bilateral negotiation between US and Japan in late April created a new momentum among other negotiating member countries for promoting and advancing the negotiations. I will not touch upon much about the Abenomics and its third arrow, but as Professor Motoshige Ito pointed out, that now Prime Minister Abe is focusing on promoting the third arrow, the growth strategy to encourage private investment. Key elements on these initiatives are deregulation in the area of energy, welfare, medicine, labor, agriculture, creation of natural strategic special zones, and the reduction of corporate tax, increase of women in the workforce. So though critics said its speed and level of accomplishment is not adequate, but I believe that the things are heading for the right direction. Finally, I would like to share this photo with you. This is a photo I took from my office in Tokyo. A gray stone building on the right-hand side bottom of the upper picture is the Supreme Court. And the green area is the palace. The photo at the right-hand side bottom is the one which was taken in 10 years ago. All these new buildings and towers were built in these 10 years. During these 10 years, Japanese economy was not in a good shape, and there was no government initiative to encourage constructions. It was a deregulation which expedite the private investment in this area. Every time young Meiji officials came to my office to seek advice for growth strategy, I always took them to the window side and show the view and tell them that the key of the growth strategy is deregulation. Thank you very much. Oops.
Okay, and batting cleanup, we have Jeff Schott. Jeff?
Thank you very much. One of the things that we pride ourselves here at the Institute is trying to encourage an informed public debate on important international economic issues. And so I'm very pleased to have been able to participate with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation in this project to have a better understanding of the Trans-Pacific Partnership in particular. We've done a lot of work on this here at the Institute, and to try to encourage a similar intensive public debate in Japan, we published and translated our major study on the Trans-Pacific Partnership in Japanese. So hopefully our viewers in Japan will be able to get a hold of this copy and have greater access to basic understanding of what the TPP is. Now, Japan became the 12th participant in the TPP negotiations a little less than a year ago and has made incredible strides in coming up to speed and participating very actively in the negotiations. It has very important economic and foreign policy objectives, and I think in order to clarify some of the three scenarios that Bob Lawrence presented earlier, it'd be useful just to tick off very quickly some key objectives for Japan and the United States in their joint participation. For Japan, the TPP should help advance its domestic economic priorities by spurring policy reforms that create a more attractive environment for investment. That's what Professor Ito mentioned before. Peter Petri here in his work at the Institute has estimated that the TPP could boost Japanese GDP by more than 2% above baseline growth when the deal is fully implemented and generate double-digit gains in Japanese exports. That's big gains for an economy and would be a function of the reforms that would be required by the agreement. Second, the TPP should also support Japan's policy of deepening trade ties with countries in the Asia-Pacific region. Japan already has a number of trade agreements, but they're not of the same quality as the TPP, and so the TPP would help upgrade a lot of Japan's economic relations with partner countries in the region, just as the TPP will help the United States upgrade NAFTA. So that's very important, but Japan and the United States don't have an existing pact. And so one of the important benefits of the TPP would be to provide a surrogate for the long-vetted but never launched bilateral FTA negotiations with the United States. Third, the TPP is also an important component, complement to trilateral talks that Japan has with China and South Korea, as well as broader negotiations of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the 10+6 or ASEAN +6 negotiations that really were an inspiration of Japanese policy of 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. The RCEP and the TPP are not alternatives. They can and should be pursued simultaneously, and indeed many countries are already doing that. 7 of the 16 participants in the RCEP are also in the TPP, and 4 other countries in the RCEP are considering very carefully future participation in the TPP. South Korea, Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand. And even China is seriously studying for the first time TPP participation before the end of this decade. And so what we see is a convergence towards the TPP among the relations among the countries in the Asia-Pacific region. And I think that's very important. It tends to indicate that TPP is a building block to regional integration and will not be the stumbling block that Bob Lawrence posed in his 3 scenarios. Fourth, the TPP helps offset discrimination that Japanese firms now face in some foreign markets due to trade pacts in which Japan is not a signatory. Most importantly, the Korea-US Free Trade Agreement, which has affected some competition between the 3 countries. And fifth, and perhaps most importantly, and with a bow to Admiral Blair, from a strategic perspective, the TPP deepens U.S. engagement in the Asia-Pacific region at a time when both countries face continuing political and strategic challenges in Northeast Asia. Working together in the TPP for mutual economic benefit will also improve the already strong U.S.-Japan relationship. So there's good reason for both countries to work together, and they're doing so. Japan's entry into the TPP talks made the negotiations more difficult, more complicated, but it also made a big deal more likely because there's a lot more on the table. Benefit for the United States, benefit for the other TPP countries who are now negotiating with Japan. Certainly, there has been a bottleneck on the agricultural negotiations. That bottleneck seems to be breaking down as a result of the progress that was made in April in talks in Tokyo between U.S. and Japanese officials. While the details of that progress, that it's being called, are not well defined, I think the indications that we get are that it seems to be evolving along the following lines. First, that Japan will commit to substantial reductions in tariffs on key products, but may not fully eliminate all the products, all the tariffs on all the products. What's important, as Mike Froman said in Singapore a couple of weeks ago, is that the deal opened up substantial new market opportunities, and that makes a big difference in accessing the Japanese market and selling more goods to Japan. And that, I think, is an interest in both countries. I think that type of progress opens the door to broader work among the 12 countries to develop the final compromises needed in the areas of the negotiations that are still open, with regard to intellectual property rights, with regard to some investment issues, particularly investor-state dispute settlement, with regard to the labor and environmental chapters, and with regard to disciplines on state-owned enterprises. In many of these areas, U.S. and Japanese positions are quite complementary. And indeed, U.S. and Japanese officials have been working very closely together to try to build the broad consensus needed to finish the TPP negotiations. I think for both the United States and for Japan, the benefits in those areas grossly outweigh the economic benefits from the hard but limited frictions that we have on agriculture. Those problems need to be resolved to ensure that there is political support for the overall deal. But I think when we do the balance of the TPP for both the United States and Japan, we'll find that it's strongly in our economic interest, it's strongly in our political interest to finish a deal before the end of this year. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff. That was great. If I can ask the panelists to come up on stage. We have just a little bit of time left over for Q&A. Again, thanks all for terrific presentations. I'd like to take the prerogative of the chair just to ask one question. There's been a lot of discussion about the upside for TPP agreement, and I tend to think that failure on TPP is unthinkable. But if the unthinkable were to happen, what would be the consequences, not only economically, but politically, strategically?
It's very difficult to just to think about the failure at this moment. It may take some more time in the negotiation if it is not going very well immediately. But I think there's some kind of momentum for having agreement. And also, the one thing which hasn't discussed yet, that is a kind of the interaction among various type of the FTAs. TPP is not only the negotiation we are doing in Japan, RCEP, and also we are now negotiating FTA or EPA with Canada. We finished an agreement with Australia, and we have a negotiation with EU. And United States also have a negotiation not only in TPP but also EU. So there's some kind of very interesting dynamism of the negotiation. We started the negotiation with Australia some years ago, but it was stalled for a while. But the activation of the TPP negotiation actually give a very interesting stimulation to just speed up the process of negotiation. So I hope this good, circle of the interaction will just continue for a while. So not only we can just finish the TPP negotiation, but also other negotiations. Thank you.
Well, I think failure would be a really serious setback, especially for American trade policy. This is the centerpiece of our initiative in Asia, and the consequences of failure would mean that we could try to go back to the drawing board, and I mean, much depends on the reason for the failure, but I think it would be a severe setback, and meanwhile, other countries, the Europeans and others, would continue to pursue their initiatives. So I think, relatively speaking, it would be severely damaging to the United States. I think the great upside of the TPP and of the TTIP is that it presents a challenge to the multilateral system to come up with its responses, which help other countries participate in these deeper integration agreements. The failure of the TPP negotiations would therefore undermine that impulse as well. So I think, in fact, we could also see that the WTO, ironically, would be weakened as well. So I think there are risks underlying this initiative that face both countries. I think then the final point has to do with the role of TPP in Japan's structural reforms. There is the issue of agriculture, but I think far more important, as Professor Ito has spoken about, is trying to stimulate investment. And I see liberalization and opening of markets, particularly in non-traded areas for foreign investors, as giving a major impulse for mergers, acquisitions, and investments. And so I think that opportunity would be lost as well, and it would be a severe setback for the structural arrow in Abenomics.
Okay.
Well, when we see an impasse in Geneva, as Bob Lawrence pointed out, high standard regional economic integration arrangement, such as TPP, would play an important role for free trade systems right now. I participated in lots of trade negotiation, and as you may think, that the negotiator always try to solve the easier one. And toward the end of the day, we will have a most difficult agenda on the table. So I believe that both US and Japan are at a very critical moment. So I think that both sides have to work even harder to seek an arrangement agreeable by both sides. And I can't imagine TPP without Japan, because TPP without Japan will be less meaningful. And also, if Japan is also only pursue RCEP, I don't think that we can make us move toward higher standards with just the RCEP arrangement. So we have to push every regional economic integration arrangement, especially TPP will be one of the key elements right now, I believe. Thanks.
Jeff, did you have any comments?
I think Robert Lawrence put it very well, and I just reinforced his comment on the risk to the multilateral system if it's shown that we can't put together a deal among like-minded countries. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for, I'm afraid, for only one question, and there's a mic I see back there, so if you could identify yourself.
Claude Barfield, the American Enterprise Institute. Excuse me. Jeff gave a very optimistic view about the agricultural negotiations, but as he and maybe Robert know, there's been a growing chorus here in the United States, particularly by the business community, to say, well, if the Japanese can't compromise, we should just leave them behind. How seriously do you take that? In other words, kick them out. How seriously do you take that, and what are your own views about this possibility if we can't reach agreement in agriculture?
Well, you have domestic negotiations and international negotiations, and I think the business community is rightfully trying to steal the resolve of negotiators to get the best deal possible. I don't think the business community views failure as an option. But I don't regard the lack of total elimination of every tariff as a failure. And indeed, in many products, you can have a very substantial liberalization that is very meaningful and causes a substantial change in the policy of the the Japanese government, and opens up new export opportunities. So I think the negotiators are moving in that direction. Of course, making the final commitments to sensitive policy reforms needs to be done in the context of the broader package where you know you're going to get benefits across the board benefiting agriculture, manufacturing, and services. And so that has to be put together. So I think I'm still optimistic, and I think the negotiators are doing a good job.
I guess I'm somewhat more negative. I think a key element in American free trade agreements has been to seek virtually universal coverage. I think it was unfortunate that sugar was accepted from the US-Australia agreement. And I think if we were to agree to exclude large numbers of tariff lines, and even if we were to allow for small tariffs to remain in place, that would set bad precedents for future potential agreements with others. The WTO requirement is for liberalization in substantially all trade. The word substantially has a variety of interpretations, but I think there's merit in that rule, and I think it would be, it would require a serious examination were we to be confronted with the prospect of having an agreement that had significant exclusions.
If I could just clarify, I agree with Robert, but the problem is solved if we don't have different exclusions or exceptions than we had in the Chorus FTA, where you had a number of tariff lines where there was partial liberalization as well.
Just a very brief comment about just the negotiations. No, although just information is not just given for outsider like us, but we are watching very carefully from outside, and there's some kind of up and down about the expectation. 3 months before President Obama is coming to Japan, I am not just expecting the agreement will be made very immediate soon. I expected more time required. And then there's very intensive negotiation, maybe 2 weeks or 1 week before the President Obama's visit to Japan. And there's a kind of increasing expectation there's going to be some kind of agreement. And during that process of adjustment, I think the number of the issue is just becoming more focused to some limited area, pork and maybe automobile and some other areas. So as Mr. Okada said, negotiators started from easier one and just try to just finish the more difficult one in the event. But important thing is we do have some kind of progress. So we have to do more effort to just finish the final point of the difficult part of the negotiation.
Well, thank you all very much. I only wish we had a little more time for questions, but lunch awaits, and as does the second panel. So please join me in thanking our panelists.
So yes, thank you very